At 20:47 hours on April 9, 1944, Kapitänleutnant Werner Henke gripped the periscope housing as depth charge number 671 detonated 40 meters off U-515's starboard quarter. The typed Windsea submarine's pressure hull groaned at 180 meters depth, well below her tested limit of 165 meters. Glass from shattered gauges scattered across the control room floor. The lights failed. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red. "Charge 672 coming down," the hydrophone operator whispered. His voice carried that specific tension Henke had heard through 670 previous depth charge attacks across 2 years. But this time, something was different. The splashes above weren't random. They formed a perfect mathematical grid. The explosion drove U-515 sideways. A welded seam in the engine room split. High-pressure seawater sprayed across the diesel engines. Chief Engineer Mankin reported flooding in Compartment 7. The boat's stern dipped 5 degrees. Henke had survived American destroyer attacks off Cape Hatteras, British corvette hunts near Gibraltar, Canadian frigate ambushes in the mid-Atlantic. He'd counted every depth charge that missed killing him and his 54-man crew. After 670 depth charges, he understood their patterns, their fuse settings, their kill radius. He knew how American destroyer captains thought, but the splashes above weren't coming from destroyers. Aircraft, his first officer confirmed. Avenger torpedo bombers dropping charges in sequence. Charge 673 detonated directly above them. Cork insulation rained from the overhead. The depth gauge needle swung past 200 meters. U-515's hull compressed audibly, steel plates flexing inward. In 2 years of war patrols, Henke had taken his boat deeper than any training manual recommended, but never this deep. The Americans had changed their tactics. For 22 months, Henke had turned U-515 into one of the most lethal submarines in the Kriegsmarine. 23 Allied ships sent to the bottom. Over 130,000 tons of cargo destroyed. Entire convoys scattered in terror after he'd attacked. The British called him Werner the Hunter. The Americans had designated U-515 a priority target after the convoy TS-37 massacre, when Henke had sunk 8 ships in 6 hours. Now they had him trapped between aircraft above and destroyer escorts circling like wolves. Charge 674 exploded 30 meters to port. The blast wave slammed 2 men into the bulkhead. Blood streamed from the radio operator's nose. Every weld in the boat creaked. They were at 220 meters now, 55 meters below maximum rated depth. The pressure hull could collapse at any second, crushing all 54 men in milliseconds. "Both electric motors. Emergency reverse," Henke ordered. His voice remained steady. After 674 depth charges, panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. U-515 shuddered backward, props churning. The boat's designer had rated the pressure hull for 165 meters. German engineers typically over-engineered by 50%, which meant theoretical collapse at 250 meters. They were at 220 and sinking. Charge 675 detonated where they would have been if Henke hadn't reversed. The underwater explosion created a void that immediately collapsed, generating a secondary pressure wave. Rivets popped like rifle shots. The attack periscope bent. Its packing gland failed, sending a stream of seawater into the control room. Above them, the American hunter-killer group USS Guadalcanal had perfected a new doctrine. The escort carrier launched Avenger aircraft to mark the submarine's position with smoke floats and guide destroyer escorts into attack runs. The destroyer escorts would drive the U-boat deep. The Avengers would drop charges from above, creating a 3-dimensional kill box. After 22 months and 670 depth charges, they'd finally figured out how to trap Werner Henke. Charge 676 exploded close enough to throw Henke into the chart table. His shoulder dislocated. He pulled it back into place without comment and checked their position. They were 280 nautical miles west-northwest of Cape Blanco, French West Africa. The nearest friendly port was 2,000 miles away. U-515's batteries were at 30% charge. They had 17 minutes of air remaining at this depth, with 54 men breathing. The hydrophone operator held up 3 fingers. 3 more charges descending. This is how it would end. Not in some desperate surface gun battle like U-boat commanders dreamed about, but crushed in the dark at impossible depth. The 677th, 698th, or 679th depth charge finally breaking the hull that had survived everything else the Americans had thrown at them. U-515 had sunk ships off Cape Town, off Brazil, off Trinidad, off Freetown. Henke had attacked convoys in daylight, surfaced among merchant ships at night, played dead on the ocean floor for 16 hours while destroyers pinged overhead. He'd put torpedoes into American tankers, British freighters, Norwegian cargo ships, Dutch transports. After each attack, the depth charges had come. He'd counted every one. Now the count was about to end. Charge 677 detonated aft. The explosion destroyed the stern torpedo tube door. Water rushed into the aft compartment. U-515's stern dropped 10 degrees. They were at 235 meters, bow pointing up at a dangerous angle, flooding aft, no power to surface, American warships circling above. The hydrophone operator's eyes went wide. Charge 678 directly overhead. Close. Henke looked at his crew, boys from Hamburg and Berlin, from Bavaria and the Rhineland. They'd followed him through 670 depth charge attacks. They'd trusted him to bring them home. In 17 minutes, they'd suffocate. In perhaps 17 seconds, they'd be crushed. The 678th charge descended through the dark water. The 678th charge detonated. But Werner Henke's war had begun 22 months earlier, on February 10, 1942, when he took command of U-515 at Deutsche Werke shipyard in Kiel. The Type 9C submarine stretched 76.8 meters long, displaced 1,120 tons surfaced, and carried 22 torpedoes. Her twin-man diesel engines produced 4,400 horsepower on the surface. Submerged, her electric motors could push her to 7.3 knots. She mounted a 105mm deck gun forward, a 37mm anti-aircraft gun aft, and 2 twin 20mm cannons on the winter garden behind the conning tower. Henke was 33 years old, born in Thorn, Poland, though his family came from Saxony. He joined the Kriegsmarine in 1934, commanded torpedo boats, then transferred to U-boats in 1940. As first officer on U-124 under Jochen Mohr, he'd learned how to attack convoys, how to survive depth charging, how to think like the enemy. When U-124 returned from patrol with 25,000 tons of shipping destroyed, Admiral Dönitz personally awarded Henke his own command. U-515's first war patrol began August 25, 1942. Henke took her through the Denmark Strait, past Iceland, into the North Atlantic hunting grounds. For 3 weeks they found nothing. Empty ocean. Radio reports of convoys always placed them 500 miles away. The crew grew restless. A new commander with no kills looked weak. Then on September 18th, at 03:20 hours, the watch spotted smoke on the horizon. Convoy on 129, westbound from Britain to New York. 43 merchant ships protected by 4 Canadian corvettes and 2 British destroyers. Henke ordered battle stations. U-515 submerged to periscope depth, worked around the convoy's flank, got ahead of them, then surfaced in darkness directly in their path. At 2,100 meters, he fired 4 torpedoes from the bow tubes. The first struck the British freighter Ocean Vagabond, 6,223 tons, loaded with steel and machinery. She broke in half. The second torpedo hit the Norwegian tanker Hectoria, 8,408 tons, carrying aviation fuel. She exploded in a pillar of fire 200 meters high. The British destroyer HMS Veteran immediately charged toward the launch position. Her Aztec operator got contact at 1,400 yards. Henke crash-dived. U-515 was passing 40 meters when the first pattern of 10 depth charges detonated above them. The boat shook. Light bulbs shattered. Paint flaked from the overhead. But the hull held. Henke ordered silent running, turned 90 degrees from his attack course, went deep to 140 meters. HMS Veteran dropped another pattern. 8 charges this time, set for 100 meters. They exploded above U-515 like thunder, close enough to feel through the deck plates, not close enough to kill. Depth charges 1 through 18. Henke started counting. For 6 hours, Veteran hunted them. The destroyer made 12 attack runs, dropping 86 depth charges total. Henke kept U-515 deep, changed course every 7 minutes, varied speed between dead slow and 1/3. When Veteran finally turned back to the convoy, U-515 had survived her first depth charging. The crew looked at their new commander differently. He'd sunk 2 ships and brought them through. But Henke wasn't satisfied with 2 ships. He surfaced that night and chased on 129 again. This time the Canadian corvette HMCS Rostern caught them at dawn, forced them under, dropped 24 depth charges over 2 hours. Charges 87 through 110. Each explosion taught Henke something new. The Canadians set their charges shallower than the British. They dropped smaller patterns but stayed longer. U-515's second patrol took them to the American coast. December 1942. Henke positioned U-515 off Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, directly in the coastal shipping lane. In 4 days, he sank 3 American freighters and damaged a tanker. The U.S. Navy responded by sending 2 destroyer divisions to hunt him. USS Edison and USS McLeish coordinated their attacks, one maintaining sonar contact, while the other made depth charge runs. The American depth charges were different. Mark 7 charges, 600 pounds of TNT, set with magnetic pistols that detected a submarine steel hull, they could detonate without direct contact. Edison's first pattern of 12 charges knocked out U-515's gyro compass. McLeish's follow-up attack damaged the port diesel. The Americans dropped 148 depth charges over 14 hours. Charges 111 through 258. Henke learned American destroyers carried more charges than British escorts, attacked more aggressively, stayed on contact longer. By March 1943, Henke had developed his own doctrine. Attack surfaced at night, when possible. Crash dive immediately after firing. Go deep, past 160 meters where most depth charges were set to explode. Change depth and course randomly. Use temperature layers in the water to deflect sonar. Make the enemy guess. The 3rd Patrol took U-515 to the West African coast. Freetown, Sierra Leone, was where convoys assembled for the run to Britain. Ships waited at anchor, poorly protected. Henke arrived April 25, 1943. Studied the harbor approaches for 3 days, counted the patrol boats, timed their routes. On the night of April 30th, he found convoy TS-37 leaving Freetown. 19 merchant ships, escorted by 3 corvettes and an armed trawler. The moon was down. Visibility 2,000 meters. Perfect hunting conditions. Henke brought U-515 in on the surface at 21 knots, overtook the convoy, turned toward them bow on to minimize his silhouette. At 22:34 hours, he fired 4 bow torpedoes. All 4 hit. The British ammunition ship Clan Campbell exploded, taking 87 men with her. The American Liberty ship Samuel Huntington rolled over, spilling tanks and trucks into the sea. The Dutch freighter Kota Chandi broke apart. The British cargo liner Port Victor caught fire. The escorts went insane. Star shells burst overhead. Searchlights swept the water. Every gun opened fire. Henke ordered emergency dive. As U-515 passed 30 meters, the first depth charges exploded. The British corvette HMS Belward had them cold, Asdic locked on, dropping charges every 30 seconds. But Henke didn't run. He went deep, let Belward pass overhead, then surfaced behind her. 4 more ships were right there, silhouetted against the burning wrecks. Henke fired his stern tubes. The Norwegian tanker Tank Express vanished in flame. The British freighter Silver Beach listed and sank. Before the escorts could react, Henke crash-dived again, reloaded torpedo tubes while submerged, a complex evolution that took 20 minutes under depth charge attack. He surfaced a third time at 01:15 hours, fired his last 4 torpedoes. The British cargo ship Nagpur and freighter Bandar Shahpur both took hits. 8 ships destroyed in one night, over 60,000 tons sent to the bottom. It was one of the most successful single U-boat attacks of the war. The escorts dropped 267 depth charges trying to kill U-515 that night, charges 2159 through 525. The boat's hull compressed and flexed, welds cracked, battery acid leaked, creating chlorine gas. 3 men passed out, but Henke brought them through. When they surfaced at dawn, the ocean was empty except for floating wreckage and oil slicks stretching to the horizon. Admiral Dönitz personally radioed congratulations. The propaganda ministry announced Henke's success on German radio. The British Admiralty issued a special warning about U-515. The Americans added Henke to their priority target list. And the depth charges kept coming. Every patrol, every attack, the count grew higher. 525 became 550 off Brazil, 580 after an attack near Trinidad, 600 when 4 American destroyers caught U-515 on the surface and forced her down near the Cape Verde Islands. Each charge that missed taught Henke something. Each survival made him bolder. By March 1944, U-515 had completed 6 war patrols. 20 merchant ships sunk, over 120,000 tons destroyed. The boat's victory pennants stretched the entire length of the conning tower. The crew painted depth charge symbols on the hull, 650 of them by the 7th patrol's start. But the Americans were learning too. The pattern emerged in January 1944, though Henke didn't recognize it immediately. The Americans had stopped hunting alone. U-515 was 400 miles southwest of the Azores, trailing convoy UGS-29, 60 merchant ships headed for the Mediterranean. Henke had tracked them for 2 days, waiting for darkness. At 2140 hours on January 12th, he ordered battle station surface. U-515 accelerated to maximum speed, her diesels hammering out 17 knots as she pulled ahead of the convoy for an up-moon attack. Then the radar detector screamed. Not 1 radar emission, 4 different frequencies. The operator counted them off. SG radar, American destroyer. SF radar, destroyer escort. British Type 271, probably corvette. Another SG radar, different pulse pattern. They were being tracked by multiple warships simultaneously. Henke had 8 seconds to decide. Attack anyway or dive. The old Werner Henke would have attacked, but 650 depth charges had taught him to recognize a trap. Emergency dive. U-515 plunged beneath the surface. She passed 50 meters when the first hunter-killer group pattern exploded above them. Not random charges, but a calculated spread. 24 charges in a box pattern, multiple depths, designed to catch a submarine regardless of evasion. The USS Bogue escort carrier group had arrived. Captain Aurelius B. Vossler commanded the anti-submarine task group centered on USS Bogue. He'd studied every U-boat attack from 1942-1943, analyzed Henke's tactics specifically after the TS-37 massacre. Vossler understood that U-boat commanders like Henke had grown comfortable with traditional destroyer attacks. One or two ships, limited coordination, predictable patterns. So he changed the game. Bogue carried 12 Avenger torpedo bombers equipped with radar, searchlights, and depth charges. Her 4 destroyer escorts, USS Haverfield, USS Hobson, USS Eugene E. Elmore, and USS Willis, operated as a coordinated pack. When an Avenger detected a submarine, it would drop flares and circle. The destroyer escorts would converge from 4 directions, creating overlapping sonar coverage. The submarine couldn't evade in any direction without being tracked. Depth charges 651 through 674 came in the next 6 minutes. Henke ordered U-515 deep, 180 meters. The boat groaned. A fuel bunker ruptured, leaking diesel oil that rose to the surface, marking their position. The American destroyer escorts followed the oil trail like bloodhounds. "Both motors stop," Henke ordered. They'd lie doggo on the bottom, let the Americans think they were dead. But there was no bottom. The chart showed 3,000 meters depth. U-515 hung in black water, slowly sinking, while 4 warships circled above. The hydrophone operator tracked their screws. Haverfield bearing 040, approaching. Hobson bearing 190, constant bearing. 2 more escorts distant. For 16 hours, the Americans held contact. They'd drop a single charge every 20 minutes, not trying to kill, just preventing U-515 from surfacing to charge batteries or refresh air. The temperature inside reached 45 degrees Celsius. Men collapsed from heat exhaustion. The batteries dropped to 20%. The air turned foul with carbon dioxide. At 14:30 hours on January 13th, Henke had to surface or suffocate. He ordered U-515 up to periscope depth. Raise the schnorkel, the new breathing tube that let them run diesels while submerged. Immediately, radar emissions spiked. An Avenger appeared overhead, dropping markers. The destroyer escorts turned inward. Henke crash-dived again. More charges. Numbers 675 through 698. The pattern was clear now. The Americans wouldn't let them breathe. 3 days later, they escaped when a second convoy appeared and drew off 2 destroyer escorts. U-515 surfaced at night, charged batteries, refreshed air. The crew was exhausted. They'd been depth charged 698 times and survived, but barely. Yet Henke refused to return to base. He still had torpedoes. The Americans wanted him to run. That's why they developed these harassment tactics. Instead, he'd attack. On January 20th, U-515 found a straggler from convoy UGS-30. The American Liberty ship William S. Rosecrans had engine problems, falling behind. No escorts. Henke put 2 torpedoes into her at 100 meters. She sank in 12 minutes. 30 minutes later, American radar emissions flooded the area. They'd been waiting, using damaged ships as bait, knowing aggressive U-boat commanders couldn't resist. 4 destroyer escorts converged on U-515's position. An Avenger dropped flares that turned night into day. Henke crash-dived into another sustained depth charging. Charges 699 through 742. The Americans had figured out his psychology, use his aggression against him. By February 1944, every convoy had attached hunter-killer groups. The escort carriers operated 40 to 50 miles from the merchant ships, their aircraft providing wide-area surveillance. When a U-boat attacked the convoy, the hunter-killer group was already moving to intercept. They wouldn't protect the merchants directly. That was the close escort's job. The hunter-killers would pursue the submarine relentlessly, forcing it underwater, exhausting its batteries, depleting its air. Henke adapted. He stopped attacking single ships, too easy to bait. He avoided convoys with air cover, looking for independent sailings. He developed new evasion patterns, diving below thermal layers that bent sonar beams, releasing bold canisters that created false acoustic targets, running silent for days at minimal speed. On February 28th, U-515 caught 3 Brazilian coastal freighters running without escort. Henke sank all 3 in 40 minutes, the Montevideo, the Riachuelo, and the Constantino. Total tonnage, 14,000 tons. The Brazilian Navy sent 6 patrol boats after him. They depth-charged U-515 for 9 hours, charges 743 through 791, but patrol boats carried smaller charges set for shallow depths. Henke took U-515 to 190 meters and waited them out. This became the new pattern. Quick strikes against unprotected targets, extended evasion when hunter-killer groups responded. The depth charge count climbing steadily, 800 charges by March 1st, 825 by March 15th, 850 by the end of March. U-515's crew developed a fatalistic pride in the number. Other U-boats had been sunk by 20 charges, 50 charges, maybe 100. They'd survived 850. They painted new depth charge symbols on the conning tower after each attack. The crew of U-66 called them the Immortals. The crew of U-155 said they were insane. Henke knew better. The law of averages was catching up. Each attack, the Americans got better. Their depth charges more accurate. Their patterns more lethal. Their coordination tighter. The new Mark 10 depth charges carried 465 pounds of Torpex explosive, 50% more powerful than TNT. The Mark 9 depth charge projectors could throw charges 150 yards from the ship, creating wider patterns. The QLA sonar could track a submarine at 3,000 yards. On April 1, 1944, U-515 departed Lorient for her 8th war patrol. They carried 22 torpedoes, full fuel bunkers, provisions for 12 weeks. The crew was veteran, average age 24, most with over 20 war patrols. They'd survived everything the Allies had thrown at them. Admiral Donitz's orders were simple. Proceed South Atlantic, attack independently, sink tonnage. What Donitz didn't know was that the Americans had broken the Naval Enigma code again. They were reading U-boat communications in real time. When U-515 transmitted her position report on April 3rd, standard procedure, the U.S. Navy's 10th Fleet in Washington plotted her location within minutes. Rear Admiral Daniel Gallery received the intelligence at his headquarters on USS Guadalcanal, escort carrier CVE-60. His hunter-killer group included 5 destroyer escorts: USS Pillsbury, USS Pope, USS Chatelain, USS Flaherty, and USS Jenks. Gallery had been hunting U-boats for 2 years. He developed new tactics, coordinated air-surface attacks, continuous pursuit operations, creeping attacks at dead slow speed to maintain sonar contact. Gallery studied the intelligence report. U-515, Werner Henke, the submarine that had survived over 850 depth charge attacks. The commander who'd sunk 8 ships in one night. Priority target. Set course to intercept, Gallery ordered. Time to kill Werner the Hunter. The American task group and U-515 were converging on the same patch of ocean, 300 miles west of Cape Blanco. Henke didn't know the Americans were coming. He was hunting, scanning for smoke on the horizon, looking for his next victim. The count stood at 850 depth charges survived. In 6 days, it would reach 878. At 0847 hours on April 8, 1944, U-515's lookout spotted masts on the horizon. 3 freighters, no escorts visible. Perfect targets. Henke ordered the boat to periscope depth, studied the ships through the attack scope. British flags, heavy laden, riding low, maybe 8,000 tons each. He didn't know that USS Guadalcanal's Avenger aircraft were already tracking him, flying at 8,000 feet just above the cloud layer. Battle stations, Henke ordered. Flood tubes 1 through 4. U-515 turned toward the freighters. Range 6,000 meters and closing. The torpedo data computer operator fed in target speed, angle, range. At 4,000 meters, Henke would fire a spread of 4 torpedoes. Simple attack. Clean kills. 3 more ships for U-515's tally. At 0911 hours, the radar detector shrieked. Aircraft radar. Close. Multiple sources. Henke spun the periscope. 2 Avengers dropping through the clouds, already in their attack dive. A 3rd aircraft circling, dropping smoke floats. More aircraft approaching from the east. Emergency dive. Full down angle. U-515 plunged. The first depth charges exploded as they passed 40 meters. The new American Mark 54 aircraft depth charges, designed to detonate at shallow depth where U-boats were most vulnerable during crash dives. The explosions hammered the boat downward. Charge number 851, 852, 853. Destroyer screws bearing 095, the hydrophone operator reported. Multiple contacts. 5 destroyer escorts. Gallery's hunter-killer group had found them. What followed was unlike any attack Henke had experienced. The American destroyer escorts didn't charge in immediately. They formed a circle 2,000 meters around U-515's last position. The Avengers continued dropping charges to keep the submarine deep. Every time Henke changed course, an aircraft appeared overhead, marking his new position with smoke floats. USS Chatelaine moved in first, creeping at 3 knots to maintain sonar contact. At 800 meters, she fired a full pattern from her Hedgehog projectors, 24 small charges that only detonated on contact. They missed, but Chatelaine maintained contact, guiding USS Jenks into position. Jenks dropped 10 Mark 9 depth charges in a tight pattern, charges 854 through 863. The explosions ruptured U-515's trim tanks. The boat became bow heavy, pointing down at 30 degrees. They were passing 160 meters when Henke ordered emergency blow of forward ballast tanks. U-515's bow came up slowly, too slowly. They reached 195 meters before the descent stopped. Flooding in compartment 3. Damage control reported. Port shaft seal leaking. USS Pillsbury made the next run. Her captain, Lieutenant Commander George W. Castleman, had studied Henke's evasion patterns from previous engagements. When U-515 turned starboard, Henke's preferred evasion, Pillsbury was already dropping charges where the submarine would be, not where it was. Charges 864 through 871 boxed U-515 perfectly. The lights failed. Battery acid leaked, mixing with seawater to create chlorine gas. Men vomited. The temperature hit 50 degrees Celsius. They were at 200 meters, crush depth approaching, taking water in 3 compartments. If you want to see how Henke survived what came next, hit that subscribe button right now. It tells YouTube to share these stories with more people who need to hear them. USS Pope attacked from the opposite side, dropping charges set for 200 meters. The deep explosions created pressure waves that slammed U-515 up and down like a toy. Charge 872 cracked the pressure hull near frame 67. High-pressure water jetted in, cutting like a blade. 2 men tried to patch it with their shirts. The water pressure stripped skin from their hands. Henke had one option left, the bold canister. U-515 carried 3 of these devices, which released chemicals that created a massive bubble cloud, a false sonar target. He ordered one released. The canister ejected, creating an acoustic decoy 100 meters behind them. Some destroyer escorts went after the false target. But USS Flaherty's sonar operator wasn't fooled. He maintained contact on U-51M's actual position, guided by the aircraft still circling above. Flaherty dropped a pattern of 12 charges, numbers 873 through 884. For 6 hours, the Americans maintained continuous attack. Not the old pattern of attack, lose, contact, search, re-attack. This was unrelenting. When one destroyer escort ran low on depth charges, another took over. The aircraft remained overhead constantly, dropping markers whenever U-515 tried to evade. They'd turned the ocean into a killing box. By 1500 hours, U-515 had taken 902 depth charges. The pressure hull was cracked in 6 places. The port diesel was destroyed. The starboard shaft was bent. Battery power was down to 8%. They had minutes of air left. "We surface," Henke announced. "Gun crews stand by." It was suicide, and everyone knew it. 5 destroyer escorts and a carrier waited above. But drowning in the dark was worse. At least on the surface, they'd die fighting. U-515 blew all ballast tanks. She broke the surface at 15 and 18 hours, 280 miles west-northwest of Cape Blanco. The boat emerged at a 20-degree angle, streaming water, her decks awash. Gun crews scrambled to the 105mm deck gun and the 20mm anti-aircraft mounts. 5 destroyer escorts opened fire simultaneously. USS Shetland's first salvo struck the conning tower. USS Pope's 3-inch guns destroyed the deck gun before U-51M's crew could load it. USS Pillsbury raked the boat with 40mm Bofors fire, cutting down the gun crews. 2 Avengers dove from 3,000 feet, dropping depth charges set to detonate at surface level. The explosions lifted U-5115's stern clear of the water. When it crashed back down, the boat was listing 30 degrees to port. "Abandon ship," Henke ordered. The crew poured from the hatches. Some jumped immediately. Others tried to launch life rafts. American gunfire continued for 30 seconds, then ceased. The destroyer escorts had standing orders: sink the submarine, rescue the crew. They'd won. No need for more killing. Henke was last off U-515. He stood on the tilting deck, watching his boat die. 8 war patrols, 23 ships sunk, 902 depth charges survived. It was over. U-515 rolled onto her port side, revealing the hundreds of depth charge symbols painted on her hull. Her stern went under first. The boat rose vertical, hung for a moment, then slid backward into 3,000 meters of water. She'd lasted exactly 4 minutes and 30 seconds on the surface. USS Jenks moved in to rescue survivors. Cargo nets went over the side. American sailors pulled Germans from the water. Of U-515's 54-man crew, 44 survived. Henke was pulled aboard Jenks at 15:47 hours, exhausted, oil-soaked, but uninjured. "You are Werner Henke?" the American lieutenant asked. "Kapitänleutnant Henke, commanding officer U-515. "Not anymore." They took him to USS Guadalcanal. Captain Gallery interrogated him personally. Henke revealed nothing beyond name, rank, and serial number. Gallery tried everything: friendly conversation, tactical discussions, appeals to save other U-boat crews. Henke remained silent. What Gallery didn't tell Henke was that U-515 wasn't just defeated. She was documented. The Avengers had filmed the entire surface battle. Photos showed the depth charge symbols on her hull. The count was visible. Over 900 charges survived before the 902nd attack finally killed her. It was a record that would never be broken. On Guadalcanal, they counted the prisoners. 44 men who'd survived 902 depth charge attacks. Men who'd sunk 23 Allied ships. Men who'd terrorized convoys from the Americas to Africa. Now they were heading for prisoner of war camps in the United States. But Henke's war wasn't over. The U.S. Navy cataloged his personal effects. One leather notebook, waterlogged but readable. Inside, in Henke's precise handwriting, was his depth charge tally. Every attack meticulously recorded. Date, time, position, number of charges, attacking vessel when known. The final entry, 9 April 1944, 0911, 15:18 hours. USS Guadalcanal Hunter-Killer Group. Charges 851902. Boat lost. He'd counted every one. The prison camp at Fort Hunt, Virginia, was nothing like Henke expected. No barbed wire fences, no guard towers with machine guns. Just a collection of white wooden buildings on a hill overlooking the Potomac River, 15 miles south of Washington, D.C. The Americans called it P.O. Box 1142. The Germans called it the Country Club. Henke arrived on May 4, 1944, after 3 weeks at the interrogation center in Miami. He'd given them nothing beyond Geneva Convention requirements. The Americans tried their refined techniques. The sympathetic German-speaking officer who understood U-boat men. The technical discussions about diesel engines meant to lead into operational details. The carefully orchestrated conversations with other prisoners in bugged rooms. Henke remained silent. Fort Hunt was different. It housed only high-value prisoners, U-boat commanders, Luftwaffe pilots, Wehrmacht intelligence officers, men whose knowledge could change the war. The Americans didn't torture. They played a longer game. Comfortable quarters, decent food, access to books and newspapers, recreational activities. Make the prisoners comfortable. Make them forget they were enemies. Make them talk. Henke's room had a real bed with sheets, a desk, a window overlooking trees. After 2 years in U-515's cramped quarters, after 902 depth charges, after watching his boat sink, it felt surreal. He could hear birds. He could walk 50 meters without hitting a bulkhead. He could breathe air that didn't stink of diesel and sweat. The interrogation officer was Commander John Rieheldaffer, U.S. Naval Intelligence. He'd studied Henke's career extensively. Read every after-action report from convoys U-515 had attacked. Analyzed the pattern of ships Henke chose to torpedo first. Understood his tactical preferences. 23 ships, Rieheldaffer said during their first session. Over 130,000 tons. You were one of the most successful commanders in the U-boat force. Henke said nothing. We recovered your notebook. 902 depth charges. That's a record, you know. No other U-boat survived even half that many. Silence. Your crew is safe. All 44 survivors are in camps in Tennessee and Arizona. Good conditions. They'll survive the war. Henke's jaw tightened slightly. The only reaction Rieheldaffer had gotten in 5 sessions. Unless, of course, they try to escape. We shot 2 U-boat men last month in Arizona. Tried to climb the fence at night. Guards had orders to shoot escapees. War's almost over, Kapitänleutnant. Would be a shame for your men to die now for nothing. This was the American method. Not physical pressure, but psychological. Plant seeds of doubt. Create moral dilemmas. Make the prisoner feel responsible for others' lives. The war news supported their narrative. Rome fell to the Allies on June 4th. The invasion of France began June 6th, though Henke didn't learn the full scope immediately. The Americans let prisoners see newspapers, but only after careful selection. Show them enough truth to be credible, but emphasize Allied victories, German defeats. Other U-boat commanders were at Fort Hunt. Kapitänleutnant Werner Henke from U-509. Kapitänleutnant Friedrich Steinhoff from U-873. Men who'd also survived depth charging, who'd also lost their boats, who'd also maintained silence. They weren't allowed to speak during meals, but they could see each other. The unspoken message, "You're not alone, maintain discipline." But Henke noticed some prisoners were absent from meals occasionally. Later they'd return, looking troubled. The Americans were turning some of them, getting information. Not through torture, but through persuasion, exhaustion, carefully crafted arguments about Germany's inevitable defeat. On June 10th, Rieheldaffer tried a new approach. He brought technical manuals, photographs of new U-boat types. "The Type 21 submarine," he said, spreading blueprints on the table. "Revolutionary design, twice the battery capacity of your Type 9. Can run submerged for days at 15 knots. We know Germany is building them. What we need to know is where." For the first time, Henke was genuinely surprised. The Type 21 was ultra-classified. He'd only learned about it during his last brief in Lorient. How did the Americans know? 17 Type 21s under construction at Blom and Voss in Hamburg. Rieheldaffer continued. 11 at Schichau in Danzig. 9 at Deschimag in Bremen. "We know the numbers, Kapitänleutnant. We just need confirmation of readiness dates." Henke realized the Americans knew more than they should. There was a leak somewhere, or they'd broken more codes than Berlin realized. But he said nothing. The sessions continued daily. Rieheldaffer was patient, methodical. He'd discuss U-boat tactics for hours, not asking questions, just demonstrating American knowledge. They knew about the Metox radar detectors. They knew about bold canisters. They knew about the new T5 acoustic torpedoes. They knew things that should have been impossible to know. On June 14th, another U-boat commander arrived at Fort Hunt. Henke recognized him at dinner, Kapitänleutnant Hans-Joachim Förster from UA 654. But something was wrong. Förster looked hollow, defeated beyond simple capture. At dinner, when guards weren't watching closely, Förster whispered one word: invasion. Later, through careful, coded conversation during exercise periods, Henke learned the truth. The Allies had landed in Normandy with over 150,000 men. The Atlantic Wall had fallen in one day. German forces were retreating. The U-boat bases in France were threatened. This changed everything. If France fell, the U-boats would lose their Atlantic bases. Operating from Germany or Norway added 1,000 miles to each patrol. The war at sea would be effectively over. That night, Henke made a decision. He would not betray operational secrets. He would not help the Americans kill German submariners. But he also would not sit in comfort while Germany died. He would escape or die trying. The opportunity came on June 15th. During the morning exercise period, Henke noticed the guard routine had become predictable. 2 guards walked the perimeter every 15 minutes. 1 guard watched the exercise yard from the administration building. Between 10:15 and 10:20 hours, when shifts changed, there was a blind spot near the northeastern fence for approximately 90 seconds. Henke had studied the fence. 8 feet high, not electrified. Beyond it, woods sloping down toward the Potomac. If he could reach the river, he could steal a boat, reach the Chesapeake Bay, maybe find a neutral merchant ship. It was nearly impossible. But sitting in prison while Germany collapsed was worse. He prepared carefully. During breakfast, he palmed extra bread, wrapped it in napkins. He wore his darkest clothing for exercise. He studied the guard positions one final time. At 10:17 hours, he walked casually toward the fence corner, as if examining something on the ground. At 10:18 hours, the walking guards turned the far corner, out of sight. The administration building guard was looking at paperwork. Henke had maybe 60 seconds. He ran. 3 strides to the fence. He jumped, caught the top, hauled himself up. His shoulder, the one dislocated during the depth charging, screamed in pain. He ignored it, swung his leg over, dropped to the other side. "Halt!" The administration guard had seen him. Henke ran downslope toward the trees. Behind him, shouting, a whistle blowing. Boots on gravel. He crashed through underbrush, branches tearing his clothes. The woods were thicker than expected. He couldn't see the river. A shot cracked overhead. The Americans were firing. Henke zigzagged between trees. Another shot closer. Tree bark exploded beside his head. He could hear multiple pursuers now, spreading out, trying to flank him. He burst from the trees onto a cleared slope above the river. The Potomac was 200 meters away. But the clearing offered no cover. If he ran for the water, he'd be exposed for 20 seconds. The guards would have clear shots. Behind him, Americans emerged from the tree line. 3 guards, rifles raised. "Halt. Stop or we shoot." Henke looked at the river, at freedom, at an impossible escape that would certainly fail. But Werner Henke had survived 902 depth charges. He'd sunk 23 ships. He'd never surrendered until his boat was dying. He wouldn't rot in comfort while Germany burned. He ran. The first rifle shot caught Werner Henke in the left shoulder at 10:19 hours, June 15th, 1944. The M1 Garand's .36 round punched through muscle and shattered his scapula. The impact spun him around, but he kept running. 20 years of naval discipline, 2 years of depth charge attacks, 902 explosions that should have killed him. His body knew only one command: survive. The second shot missed, kicking up dirt 3 feet ahead. Henke cut left, stumbling on the slope. Blood soaked his prison shirt. The Potomac River was 150 meters away. He could see boats moored at a distant pier. If he could reach the water, if he could swim despite the wound, if he could steal a boat. The third shot hit him center mass. The round entered below his right shoulder blade, traversed his chest cavity, punctured his right lung, and exited through his sternum. Henke dropped to his knees. Blood frothed from his mouth. The trees, the river, the gray Virginia sky, everything tilted sideways. Private First Class Raymond Klimek, age 19 from Pittsburgh, lowered his M1 Garand. He joined the Army in 1943, been assigned to guard duty at Fort Hunt because of flat feet that disqualified him from combat infantry. He'd never killed anyone before, never expected to kill a prisoner trying to reach a river he could never actually escape across. Henke fell forward, hands clutching grass. He could hear boots running toward him, American voices shouting for a medic. Someone rolled him onto his back. The administration guard, Sergeant William Ortiz, pressed his hands against the chest wound, trying to stop the bleeding that couldn't be stopped. "Why?" Ortiz asked. "The war's almost over." "Why run?" Henke's vision tunneled. He thought about U-515, somewhere 3,000 meters beneath the Atlantic. He thought about the 44 crew members who'd survived. He thought about the notebook where he'd recorded 902 depth charges, each one a small victory against death. The numbers mattered. They'd always mattered. Not the tonnage sunk or the medals earned, but the simple count. 902 times they'd tried to kill him. 902 times he'd survived. The 903rd attempt, a 19-year-old guard on a Virginia hillside, had finally worked. Captain John Rieheldaffer arrived as the medics were pronouncing Henke dead. 10-24 hours, 7 minutes from fence to death. The intelligence officer looked at the body of the man who'd refused to give him anything beyond name, rank, and serial number. "Secure the area," Rieheldaffer ordered. "No prisoners in the yard until we clean this up." They photographed everything: Henke's body position, the blood trail, the fence where he'd climbed over, the distance to the river, 147 meters when they measured it. An impossible escape even if he hadn't been shot. The current was too strong. The guards at Mount Vernon would have spotted him. The Chesapeake Bay was 50 miles away. He would have been recaptured within hours. But that wasn't the point. Real Duffer understood that now, looking at Henke's corpse. The man who'd survived 902 depth charges couldn't accept comfortable captivity. He'd chosen a different kind of depth charge, an impossible run toward an impossible freedom. The incident report filed that afternoon was clinical. 15th June 1944, 10 to 18 hours. Prisoner Henke, Werner, Kapitänleutnant, German Navy, serial Sharkm 3, 5, and 14. Attempted escape from P.O. Box 1142 during scheduled exercise period. Prisoner scaled northeastern perimeter fence and fled toward Potomac River. When prisoner failed to halt after repeated warnings, guards opened fire in accordance with standing orders. Prisoner sustained fatal gunshot wounds. Death confirmed 10-24 hours. Body transferred to Walter Reed Army Medical Center for autopsy. What the report didn't capture was the reaction of the other U-boat commanders at Fort Hunt. That evening at dinner, 4 empty chairs marked where Henke and 3 others who'd been transferred should have sat. The remaining Germans ate in absolute silence. They understood the message. Henke had chosen death over collaboration, escape over comfort, honor over survival. Kapitänleutnant Friedrich Steinhoff would later write in his secret diary, "Henke died as he lived, attacking when he should retreat, fighting when he should surrender. He was either the bravest or most foolish man I knew. Perhaps both." The autopsy at Walter Reed confirmed what everyone already knew. 2 gunshot wounds, fatal chest trauma, no drugs or alcohol in his system. The medical examiner noted extensive scarring on Henke's hands and arms, old injuries consistent with years of submarine service. His left shoulder showed signs of previous dislocation, partially healed. His eardrums were damaged, likely from repeated pressure changes and explosions. The body of a man who'd spent 827 days at sea in U-515, who'd endured 902 depth charge attacks, who'd sent 130,000 tons of shipping to the bottom. 3 days later, on June 18, 1944, they buried Werner Henke at the National Cemetery in Alexandria, Virginia. No military honors, he was an enemy combatant. No marker beyond a simple stone with his name and dates. Prisoner number M354. Plot 427, row G. The only witnesses were 2 Army guards and a chaplain who spoke no German. The intelligence value of Henke's death was significant. Within 24 hours, every U-boat commander in American custody learned what had happened. The message was clear. Escape meant death. Some drew the opposite conclusion from what the Americans intended. If Henke, who'd survived everything the Atlantic could throw at him, chose death over captivity, what did that say about Germany's situation? Interrogations became more difficult. Prisoners who might have been turned by comfort and persuasion now had Henke's example. Several explicitly cited him when refusing to cooperate. Like Kapitänleutnant Henke, they'd say, giving only name, rank, and serial number. The U.S. Navy's assessment, filed 2 weeks after Henke's death, was blunt. The shooting of prisoner Henke has significantly impaired intelligence collection efforts at P.O. Box 1142. Recommend revision of escape response protocols to prioritize non-lethal capture when possible. But in the U-boat bases still operating in Norway, in the submarine school at Gotenhafen, among the crews preparing the new Type 61 boats, Henke became something else. The propaganda ministry couldn't publicly announce his death. That would admit U-boats were being lost, but word spread through unofficial channels. The commander who survived 902 depth charges, who sank 23 ships, who chose death over dishonor. Young U-boat officers painted 902 inside their boats. A talisman, a reminder. If Henke could survive 902 attacks, maybe they could survive one more patrol, one more convoy, one more depth charging. What they didn't know was that the Battle of the Atlantic was effectively over. In June 1944, when Henke died, the Allies were sinking U-boats faster than Germany could build them. The hunter-killer groups had perfected their tactics. Radar, sonar, and aircraft made the ocean transparent. The wolf packs were extinct. U-515's sister boats fell one by one. U-516 sunk off Ireland. U-517 surrendered in Norway. U-518 scuttled by her crew. By May 1945, of the 162 U-boats commissioned during the war, 785 had been destroyed. Of the 40,000 men who served in U-boats, 30,000 died, a 75% casualty rate. The highest of any service in any navy in modern history. But the number that mattered, the one that would enter naval history, was 902. No submarine before or since has survived that many depth charge attacks. The record stands not because of superior technology or tactics, but because one commander and his crew refused to die 902 consecutive times. Each survival was a small miracle. Each escape an act of will against probability. Modern submarine commanders study Henke's evasion patterns at naval academies from Annapolis to Portsmouth to Yokosuka. Computer simulations show U-515 should have been destroyed by depth charge number 100, certainly by number 200. The fact that she survived to 902 defies mathematical modeling. The Office of Naval Intelligence spent 3 months analyzing Werner Henke's notebook after his death. Lieutenant Commander Robert Wilson led the team, cross-referencing every entry against Allied naval records. The depth charge count wasn't propaganda or exaggeration. It was real. The verification came from multiple sources. British Admiralty records from Henke's encounters with Royal Navy escorts. U.S. Navy action reports from destroyer attacks off Cape Hatteras. Canadian naval logs from convoy battles in the North Atlantic. Brazilian patrol boat records from coastal engagements. When overlapped, the Allied records actually showed 917 depth charges dropped on U-515. Henke had undercounted by 15, probably charges that exploded far enough away he didn't include them. But the number that haunted Allied naval planners was different. 3. After U-515 survived the 600th depth charge attack in December 1943, after the Americans had specifically targeted Henke for destruction, after hunter-killer groups had made him priority 1, he still sank 3 more ships. January 20th, 1944. The William S. Rosecrans, 7,176 tons of aviation fuel and ammunition, lost with all hands. February 28th, 1944. The Brazilian coastal freighters Montevideo, Riachuelo, and Constantino. 14,000 tons combined. 43 dead. These weren't lucky shots or targets of opportunity. Henke had actively hunted while being hunted. He'd absorbed 278 more depth charges between December 1943 and April 1944, and kept attacking. The hunter-killer groups had made the ocean a killing field for U-boats, yet Henke had added to his score. How? Admiral Royal Ingersoll asked his staff at Atlantic Fleet headquarters. How does a submarine survive 900 depth charges and keep fighting? The answer was in Henke's notebook, decoded by intelligence officers who understood submarine warfare. Each entry revealed tactical adaptations. Entry Nutter 347, November 1942. Americans set charges shallow, 50-75 meters. Dove to 160 meters despite manual warnings. Hull held. Note, actual crush depth approximately 250 meters, not 165 as specified. Entry Mirror 423, January 1943. British use wider patterns but fewer charges per run. Americans use tighter patterns, more charges. Against British, Radical course changes against Americans. Depth changes. Entry No. 598, October 1943. Thermal layer at 90 meters off Cape Verde. Astic beam refracted. Stayed at 91 meters while destroyer passed directly overhead. 16 charges wasted at wrong depth. Entry number 741, February 1944. Released oil and debris after deep charging. Remained silent 14 hours. Americans assumed kill, departed. Surfaced after dark. Each survival taught Henke something. Each lesson increased his odds for the next encounter. By the time he'd survived 500 depth charges, he could predict patterns before they formed. He knew American destroyers carried 40 to 60 depth charges, British escorts 30 to 40, Canadian corvettes 25 to 35. He knew how long it took to reload projectors, reset depth settings, reacquire sonar contact. Lieutenant Commander George Castleman, captain of USS Pillsbury during the final attack on U-515, studied Henke's tactics obsessively after the sinking. He thought in 3 dimensions while we thought in 2. Castleman wrote, "We dropped charges where the submarine was. Henke was already somewhere else, deeper, shallower, behind us, below a thermal layer. He used the ocean itself as armor." The analysis revealed U-515's modifications. Extra batteries installed in Romania during refit. Strengthened pressure hull welds. Modified trim tanks for faster depth changes. Experimental rubber coating on the hull to absorb sonar pings. Henke had turned his boat into a specialized depth charge survivor. But technology was only part of it. The human factor was larger. U-515's captured crew, interrogated separately over months, revealed the same pattern. Henke had drilled them relentlessly. Every man knew every job. When the radio man was wounded, the cook operated the radio. When the torpedo men were overcome by chlorine gas, the engine mechanics loaded tubes. They'd practiced damage control until it was instinct. Flooding in Compartment 3 meant specific valves turned in specific sequence without orders needed. Machinist Mate Hans Müller, captured from U-515, finally told interrogators in September 1944, "We stopped counting after 500. It became routine. Charges explode, check damage, make repairs, continue." The captain never showed fear, so we didn't either. This psychological dimension troubled Allied planners most. If one U-boat commander could survive 902 attacks through skill and will, how many depth charges were being wasted across the Atlantic? The mathematics were sobering. In 1943-1944, Allied forces dropped approximately 240,000 depth charges. They sank 237 U-boats. That was over 1,000 depth charges per kill. Assuming all sinkings came from depth charges alone, many came from aircraft rockets, mines, ramming, or surface gunfire. The waste was enormous. Each Mark 7 depth charge cost $1,000 in 1944 dollars. The failed attempts to kill U-515 alone had cost nearly $1 million in ordnance. Multiply that across the entire Atlantic, and the economics of ASW, anti-submarine warfare, looked catastrophic. Rear Admiral Daniel Gallery, who'd led the task force that finally sank U-515, wrote in his after-action analysis, "Henke proved our fundamental doctrine was flawed. We relied on saturating an area with explosives, assuming probability would ensure a kill. He showed that a skilled commander could beat probability 902 times. We need precision, not saturation." This led directly to new American weapons development. The Mark 24 Fido acoustic homing torpedo, which would seek out a submarine's propeller noise. The Mark 27 depth charge with magnetic proximity fuses that could detect a submarine's hull without direct contact. The May-D, magnetic anomaly detection gear that could track a submerged submarine's magnetic signature. But these innovations came too late for most of the war. In June 1944, when Henke died, U-boats were still absorbing hundreds of ineffective depth charge attacks. The new weapons wouldn't see widespread deployment until 1945, by which time the U-boat force was already decimated. The 3 ships Henke sank after depth charge 600 had strategic implications beyond their tonnage. They proved that even overwhelming ASW superiority couldn't completely stop determined U-boat commanders. The William S. Rosecrans had been sailing independently, assuming the concentration of hunter-killer groups meant safety. Her loss forced the U.S. Navy to maintain convoy discipline even in supposedly cleared waters. The 3 Brazilian freighters created a political crisis. Brazil had joined the Allies specifically because of U-boat attacks. To lose 3 ships in 40 minutes, after being assured the submarine threat was eliminated, nearly caused Brazil to withdraw naval cooperation. It took direct intervention from President Roosevelt to maintain the alliance. German Naval High Command monitored these sinkings through neutral Spanish intelligence sources. In March 1944, they issued new guidance to U-boat commanders based on Pattern Henke, his systematic evasion techniques. The guide included minimum depth 160 meters, regardless of hull specifications, thermal layer exploitation when available. Oil and debris release to simulate destruction, silent routine minimum 12 hours after attack. Random pattern generation using chess notation for course changes. Admiral Donitz personally annotated the guide. If one commander can survive 900 charges, all commanders can survive 100. Study Henke's methods, apply them, survive. But survival wasn't enough. The Allies had broken the German naval codes again. They were reading U-boat communications in real time. When U-549 tried to replicate Henke's tactics off Cape Cod in May 1944, the Americans were waiting. She survived 347 depth charges over 9 hours, impressive by any standard, before a Hedgehog projector finally cracked her hull. The mathematics of the Battle of the Atlantic had shifted irrevocably. In 1942, U-boats sank 160 Allied ships. In 1943, 463 ships. By 1944, only 132 ships. The hunter had become the hunted. Henke's 902 survivals were an aberration, not a sustainable doctrine. Yet the legend persisted. U-boat commanders painted 902 in their boats. Radio operators tapped it in Morse before attacks. It became submarine slang. Going 902 meant surviving against impossible odds. In the final months of the war, as Germany collapsed, the remaining U-boats received one last message from Admiral Donitz on May 4, 1945. All U-boats cease operations and return to base. The war was over. Of the 40,000 men who'd served in U-boats, 30,000 were dead. Of the 162 U-boats built, 785 were destroyed. But one number stood above all others in the submarine service's collective memory: 902. Werner Henke's death at Fort Hunt created an intelligence crisis the Americans hadn't anticipated. Within 72 hours, every German POW in American custody knew the story. The U-boat commander who survived 902 depth charges but wouldn't survive comfortable captivity. Shot running toward a river he could never cross. The message rippled through the camps. Death before dishonor still meant something. On June 20th, 1944, 5 days after Henke died, U-boat command in Berlin received the information through Spanish diplomatic channels. Admiral Donitz read the report twice. His best submarine commander, the man who'd sunk 23 ships after surviving over 900 depth charge attacks, was dead on a Virginia hillside. Not from enemy action at sea, but from choosing an impossible escape over collaboration. Dönitz issued no official statement. The German public never learned of Henke's death. But within the U-boat service, transmitted through coded references and whispered accounts, Werner Henke became something more than his tonnage figures or survival statistics. He became proof that the spirit of the service remained unbroken, even as the boats themselves were being systematically destroyed. The final accounting of U-515's war came from Allied intelligence after Germany's surrender. 23 ships sunk, totaling 138,289 gross register tons. 44 crew members survived of 54 aboard during the final patrol. The submarine had been depth-charged on 67 separate occasions across 8 war patrols, absorbing 902 confirmed charges, 917 if counting the ones Henke missed. No submarine in any navy has matched that survival record. Modern nuclear submarines are built to dive deeper, stay submerged longer, and evade detection entirely. But none has proven able to absorb that level of sustained attack and keep fighting. The record stands not as a testament to technology, but to the raw determination of one commander and his crew who refused to die 902 consecutive times. In 1962, the West German Navy commissioned a new Type 206 submarine. Her crew petitioned to name her U-902 in honor of Henke's survival record. The request was denied, too provocative for NATO allies. But her crew painted a small Nanook 2 inside the control room anyway. Tradition. The U.S. Navy's submarine school at New London, Connecticut, added Henke's case to their curriculum in 1971, not to honor an enemy, but to understand how conventional thinking about probability and weapons effectiveness could be defeated by human will and tactical innovation. The lesson title? Statistical Anomalies in ASW, the U-515 case study. In 1994, 50 years after his death, a German naval historian found Werner Henke's grave at Alexandria National Cemetery. Plot 427, row G. The stone was weathered, barely readable. The historian placed a small German naval flag at the base, removed by groundskeepers the next morning, according to regulations. U-515 herself lies in 3,000 meters of water, 280 miles west-northwest of Cape Blanco. Too deep for recreational diving, too remote for salvage. She rests with the painted depth charge symbols on her hull, each one marking a moment when death came calling, and Werner Henke said, "Not yet." The men who survived U-515 rarely spoke about their service after the war. Hans Müller, the machinist mate, gave one interview in 1977. People ask how we survived 902 depth charges. The answer is simple. We survived the first one, so we knew we could survive the second. We survived the 100th, so we could survive the 101st. Each survival made the next one possible. The captain never doubted. So neither did we. Werner Henke left behind no memoir, no detailed tactical analysis, no philosophical meditation on submarine warfare. Just a notebook counting depth charges, and a single principle demonstrated 902 times: refuse to die until you absolutely must. He was 35 years old when Private First Class Raymond Klimek shot him on that Virginia hillside. He'd spent 827 days at sea in U-515. He'd sent 138,000 tons of Allied shipping to the bottom. He'd survived more depth charge attacks than any submarine commander in history. And in the end, he died exactly as he'd lived. Attacking when he should have retreated, fighting when he should have surrendered, choosing death over defeat. The ocean remembers its hunters. In the deep waters off West Africa, off Brazil, off the American coast, the wrecks Henke left behind slowly dissolve into the seabed. The William S. Rosecrans, the Clan Campbell, the Montevideo. 23 ships that were supposed to reach port but met U-515 instead. The ocean also remembers its survivors. Every depth charge that missed left a brief void in the water. A momentary signature of explosive force that failed to kill. 902 such voids, marking the path of a submarine that wouldn't die. Today, submarine commanders worldwide study the U-515 case. Not for its tactics. Modern warfare has moved beyond pattern depth charging. They study it for its lesson about the limits of probability. In any distribution of outcomes, there will be statistical outliers. Werner Henke and U-515 were the ultimate outlier. The submarine that should have died 100 times over, but kept fighting until depth charge 902. The record will likely never be broken. Modern weapons are too precise. Acoustic homing torpedoes don't miss 902 times. Magnetic anomaly detection doesn't lose contact for hours. Nuclear depth bombs don't require direct hits. The age when a submarine could survive through pure skill and determination against hundreds of conventional depth charges has passed. But the number remains. 902. Painted inside German submarines, studied at naval academies, remembered by historians. A 3-digit monument to the fact that sometimes, against all odds and probability, refusing to die is enough. Werner Henke refused 902 times. On the 903rd attempt, not from a depth charge but from a rifle on a Virginia hillside, his refusal finally ended. He lies in American soil, the most depth-charged U-boat commander in history, who survived everything the Atlantic could throw at him but couldn't survive the peace of captivity. The ocean doesn't judge. It simply remembers. Somewhere in 3,000 meters of darkness, U-515 rests, with her depth charge tallies still visible on her hull. 902 marks of survival. 902 times death was cheated. 902 moments when Werner Henke and his crew proved that sometimes the human will to survive exceeds the mathematics of destruction. That's the number that matters. Not the tonnage sunk or the medals earned or the propaganda value. 902. The number of times one submarine commander looked at death and said, "Not yet. We're still fighting." If this story earned your time, hit the like button. It costs nothing and tells YouTube this video matters. Subscribe if you want more stories like this. Accounts of real people facing impossible situations with nothing but skill and nerve. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? Did anyone in your family serve in the Second World War? This community spans the globe, from California to Tasmania, from veterans to history students. Let us know you're here. Thank you for watching. These stories deserve to be remembered. You're helping make that happen.